I never thought I'd find myself standing in Grandma Ellen's old, decaying mansion, surrounded by grieving relatives who seemed more interested in their whispered conversations than the casket before them. Her funeral was a somber affair, draped in an atmosphere as oppressive as the old woman herself. I stood there, feeling the weight of her gaze even in death, a sensation I couldn't shake since the day she passed. It was as if her spirit had lingered, trapped in this dreary old house where she spent most of her reclusive life. As a child, Grandma Ellen had always treated me differently from my siblings and cousins. Her gaze would linger on me for a moment too long, her icy blue eyes studying me as though I were some puzzle she was determined to solve. Even now, her fascination was a mystery, one that seemed to cast a shadow over my entire existence. After the service, as people shuffled out of the room, offering their perfunctory condolences, I found myself alone with the coffin. The silence was deafening, almost as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "You always were her favorite, you know." A voice cut through the oppressive silence, startling me. I turned to see my mother standing in the doorway, her expression a mix of sorrow and something else, something like relief. "I know," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "She always watched me, didn't she? Like she knew something the rest of us didn't." "She did have her secrets," my mother said, stepping closer, her gaze fixed on the casket, "and now she's passed them on to you." That was the moment everything changed. In the aftermath of Ellen's death, she had left me more than just memories and unsettling stares. She left me her house, a sprawling, decaying structure that groaned under the weight of its age and the secrets it held. That night, after everyone had left, I returned to the mansion. Shadows seemed to stretch longer here, creeping over the walls like living things. The very air felt thick, suffocating, as if the house resented my presence. As I walked through the dimly lit hallways, the flickering lights above cast an eerie glow, creating shapes in the dark that made my heart pound. Each room was filled with remnants of Ellen's life, faded photographs, old books, and dust-covered trinkets that seemed to whisper stories of the past. I paused in front of a portrait of Ellen, her stern face captured in oils. Her eyes, even in the painting, seemed to follow me with that same unnerving intensity. A chill ran down my spine, and for a moment, I could have sworn the shadows moved. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me like a second skin. But as I stood there, alone in the house that felt more like a tomb than a home, I realized that this was just the beginning. Ellen's legacy was more than bricks and mortar. It was a presence. An invisible hand seemed to tighten its grip on my life with each passing moment. Later that night, as I lay in the bed that used to be Ellen's, air grew colder, kind of cold that seeped into your bones. I pulled the covers tight, listening to the creaks and groans of the old house settling around me. Then I heard it, faint whisper, barely audible, the rustle of leaves in a distant breeze. I froze, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart. It was a voice, low and insistent, murmuring my name in a tone that was both familiar and terrifying. "Jason." The sound of my name echoing through the darkness sent a jolt of fear through me. I sat up, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. There was nothing, just the empty room and the oppressive silence pressing in from all sides. The next day, as I sat in the lawyer's office, the reading of Ellen's will took an unexpected turn. Amid the legal jargon and formalities, the lawyer's voice cut through like a knife. "To my grandson Jason, I leave my home and all it contains. He alone will understand its true worth and purpose." Words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. There were murmurs from my relatives, a mix of envy and disbelief. But all I could think about was the voice in the night and the feeling that something far darker awaited me in Ellen's bequest. As we left the office, my mother pulled me aside, her expression grave. "Be careful, Jason. That house, it's not just a house. Ellen knew things that might be best left alone." I nodded, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. Deep down, I knew she was right. The house felt alive, its walls pulsating with secrets and stories long buried, and Ellen's shadow loomed large, refusing to let go, a specter that clung to me like a second skin. As I drove back to the mansion, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something far more sinister than I had ever imagined. The house waited for me, a living entity with its own desires and demands, and I knew that whatever awaited inside, it would test my sanity and courage like nothing else. That night, as I stood on the threshold, I realized that Ellen's fascination with me was more than just an oddity. It was a bond, a link between us that defied even death. And as I stepped into the darkness, I understood that her legacy was more than an inheritance. It was a curse, one that I would have to unravel before it consumed me entirely. The door creaked shut behind me, sealing me inside the world Ellen had left behind, a world of shadows, whispers, and a terror that seemed to reach out from beyond the grave, determined to claim me as its own. And so began my descent into the heart of Ellen's dark and twisted legacy, where the line between reality and nightmare blurred, and every shadow hid a secret waiting to be uncovered. After another restless night in Ellen's house, I awoke to a gray, overcast morning. The sky was heavy with clouds that seemed to press down on the earth, casting a gloomy pall over everything. As I shuffled through the creaky old halls, I could feel the house's presence enveloping me like a suffocating blanket. Every corner seemed to harbor secrets, and every sound seemed to echo with a sinister purpose. I made my way to the kitchen, hoping a cup of coffee would shake off the sense of unease that had settled over me. But as I brewed the coffee, my mind wandered back to the voice I had heard in the night, a haunting whisper that had chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just in my head. I could still feel the echo of it reverberating through my mind. Jason. I shivered and forced myself to focus on the day ahead. There was much to do, and a part of me was determined to unravel the mysteries Ellen had left behind. As much as her legacy frightened me, it was like a dark puzzle that demanded to be solved. After breakfast, I decided to start with the attic. It was the one part of the house I'd been avoiding, a place Ellen had always kept locked, forbidding anyone from entering. But now, with the keys in hand, I felt compelled to see what secrets lay hidden in the shadows. I climbed the narrow staircase leading to the attic, each step creaking ominously beneath my weight. At the top, a heavy wooden door barred my way. The air was thick with dust and anticipation as I inserted the key and turned it with a resounding click. The door swung open with a groan, revealing a darkened space filled with the musty scent of forgotten years. Inside, the attic was a maze of old furniture, draped in tattered sheets, boxes piled high, and shadows lurking in every corner. Cobwebs clung to the rafters like ghostly fingers, and the dim light filtering through the small window cast eerie patterns on the floor. As I stepped inside, a chill ran down my spine. The air felt different here, charged with an energy that was both familiar and unsettling. It was as if the attic had its own heartbeat, echoing with the memories of those who had once tread these floors. I moved cautiously, my footsteps echoing in the silence. My eyes scanned the room, landing on a large trunk in the corner, its surface covered in dust and its latch rusted with age. Something about it drew me in, a magnetic pull that I couldn't resist. I knelt before the trunk, hesitating for a moment. The air around me seemed to thicken, and I felt a sense of foreboding settle over me. But curiosity got the better of fear, and I reached for the latch, my fingers trembling slightly. With a creak, the lid opened, revealing a treasure trove of Ellen's past. Old photographs, faded letters, and a collection of objects that seemed both mundane and inexplicable. I rifled through the contents, feeling like an intruder in my own family's history. And then I found them. The diary. Bound in cracked leather, the journals were filled with Ellen's meticulous handwriting, the ink still legible despite the passage of time. My heart raced as I picked one up, flipping through the pages, glimpsing snippets of her life. The rituals are essential for maintaining the bond. Jason must be prepared for what lies ahead. The words sent a jolt of terror through me. What rituals? What bond? And why did she write about me as if I were part of some sinister plan? I continued to read, my eyes scanning the pages for answers. The entries detailed strange gatherings, mysterious symbols, and references to ancient practices, chilled me to the core. It was a side of Ellen I had never known, a world of darkness and secrecy that seemed to have consumed her. And then there were the sketches, twisted figures, haunting symbols, and cryptic diagrams that made my skin crawl. It was as if Ellen had been trying to unlock some forbidden knowledge, and I was the key she needed. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, a soft, mocking laughter echoing through the attic. I looked around, panic gripping me, but saw nothing. The shadows seemed to shift and dance, teasing me with shapes that vanished when I looked directly at them. My heart pounded in my chest as I closed the diary, pages rustling like whispers in the wind. I needed to get out, to escape the suffocating atmosphere that threatened to overwhelm me. As I turned to leave, a movement caught my eye, a flash of something in the shadows. I squinted, trying to make out the form that seemed to lurk just beyond the edge of my vision. And then I saw her. Figure stood in the far corner, half hidden in darkness. Her face was obscured, but I knew instinctively who she was. Ellen, or what was left of her. She watched me with those cold, piercing eyes, presence palpable and terrifying. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, and blinked, only to find the corner empty once more. The attic was still, but I could feel her presence lingering, a malevolent force that refused to let go. I fled down the stairs, the door slamming shut behind me with a thunderous crash that echoed through the house. I didn't stop until I was back in the relative safety of the kitchen, my hands shaking as I tried to catch my breath. The realization hit me like a freight train. Ellen's influence hadn't ended with her death. She was still here, woven into the very fabric of the house, watching and waiting. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, trying to process what I had seen and read. The rational part of me wanted to dismiss it all as a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination, fueled by grief and stress. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The attic held more than just Ellen's memories, held the truth about her life and the dark legacy she had left for me. And I was caught in its web, ensnared by a past I barely understood. As night fell, the house seemed to come alive once more. The walls creaked and groaned, and the shadows stretched out their fingers, eager to reclaim what was theirs. I felt their eyes on me, an unrelenting gaze that followed me from room to room, whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. When I finally crawled into bed, exhaustion weighed heavily on me, but sleep was elusive. I lay there, staring into the darkness, my mind racing with questions and fears that refused to be silenced. And as the house settled into an uneasy silence, I heard it again. The voice, the whisper that had haunted me since the night I arrived, came from the shadows, insistent and chilling, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. Jason. I bolted upright, my breath hitching in my throat. The room was empty, but the presence lingered, a constant reminder that Ellen's shadow loomed large, refusing to fade away. I knew I had to face whatever was haunting me, to delve deeper into the mysteries of this house and the curse Ellen had left behind. But as the night stretched on, I wondered if I had the strength to confront the darkness that awaited me, or if it would consume me entirely. Sleep was a distant memory by the time morning light bled through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. I lay in bed, feeling like I hadn't slept a wink. The whispers had continued throughout the night, echoing inside my mind like a sinister lullaby, refusing to grant me even a moment's peace. Ellen's presence clung to me like a heavy fog, and I knew that as long as I stayed here, I would never escape her shadow. After dragging myself out of bed, I headed downstairs. The house felt different in the light of day. Less menacing, perhaps, but still charged with an oppressive energy. I wandered through the rooms aimlessly, my mind racing with thoughts of the attic, the diaries, and the ominous sketches. I tried to busy myself with mundane tasks, cleaning the kitchen, dusting the shelves, anything to distract myself from the oppressive aura that seemed to cling to every corner of the house. But even as I worked, the feeling of being watched persisted, an unsettling sensation that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was mid-afternoon when I found myself in the library, a grand room lined with shelves that reached up to the high ceilings. Books were scattered everywhere, some stacked haphazardly on tables, others piled on the floor. Dust motes danced in the beams of light streaming through the tall windows, and the air was filled with the musty scent of old paper. I wandered through the room, running my fingers along the spines of the books, many of which seemed ancient and unread. I paused in front of a large bookshelf, something compelling me to examine it more closely. The wood was worn and aged, but it seemed somehow different from the others, as though it concealed something beneath its surface. Curiosity piqued. I pressed my hands against the wood, feeling for any irregularities. After a moment, my fingers brushed against a small, almost imperceptible notch. I hesitated, a sense of foreboding gnawing at the edges of my mind, but the compulsion to explore was stronger. With a firm push, the bookshelf shifted, gliding away to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Cold draft swept up from the hidden passage, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decay. Chill ran through me as I stood there staring into the abyss below. Every instinct screamed at me to turn away, close the passage and forget it existed. But something, curiosity, a sense of destiny, or perhaps Ellen's lingering influence, urged me forward. I grabbed a flashlight from a nearby table and stepped onto the staircase, the wooden steps creaking beneath my weight. As I descended into the gloom, the light from above quickly faded, leaving me enveloped in darkness. The staircase wound downward, deeper and deeper, the air growing colder with each step. The silence was absolute, broken only by the echo of my footsteps and the occasional drip of water. I could feel the weight of the earth pressing down on me, and a sense of claustrophobia clawed at the edges of my consciousness. Finally, I reached the bottom, where a narrow corridor stretched out before me, the walls lined with stone and dirt. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating a path that seemed to lead deeper into the bowels of the earth. As I moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The sensation was so intense it felt like a physical presence, as though unseen eyes were tracking my every move. I spun around, shining the flashlight into the shadows, but found nothing. The air was still, the silence absolute, yet the feeling persisted, wrapping around me like a shroud. After what felt like an eternity, the corridor opened into a cavernous chamber. The walls lined with more of Ellen's peculiar sketches, symbols and figures that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, and the light from my flashlight seemed to flicker as though struggling against the darkness. In the center of the chamber stood an altar, its surface covered in dust and cobwebs. I approached cautiously, the flashlight revealing a series of strange carvings etched into the stone, symbols that mirrored those in Ellen's diaries. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the significance of the place. This wasn't just a forgotten cellar or basement. It was a shrine, place of ritual and secret, hidden away from prying eyes. As I stood there, a wave of nausea washed over me, and the air seemed to thrum with an energy I couldn't quite place. It was as if the chamber itself was alive, watching, waiting. I took a step back, my mind racing with possibilities, when I noticed something half buried in the dirt near the altar. I knelt down, brushing away the dust and debris, revealing a small wooden box, intricately carved with symbols similar to those on the altar. With trembling hands, I opened the box, revealing a collection of objects that sent a shiver down my spine. Fragments of bone, a tarnished silver locket, and a series of ancient-looking stones etched with runes. But what caught my attention was a photograph, yellowed with age, showing Ellen as a young woman, standing beside a figure whose face was obscured. There was something unsettling about the image, something that tugged at the edges of my memory. As I studied the photograph, a whisper echoed through the chamber, a voice that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. "Jason?" I froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. The voice was unmistakable. Ellen's voice, low and insistent, filling the space with a sense of urgency and dread. "Who's there?" called out, my voice trembling slightly. But there was no response, only the echo of my own words bouncing off the stone walls. I stood there, the weight of the chamber pressing down on me, the realization dawning that whatever secrets Ellen had kept, they were far darker than I had imagined. Her fascination with me, the rituals, the hidden chamber, it all pointed to something sinister, a legacy I was only beginning to understand. I backed away from the altar, the photograph still clutched in my hand. The chamber seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Dark energy that threatened to engulf me. I lingered too long. As I made my way back through the corridor, flashlight flickered again, the light dimming as if struggling against an unseen force. The air was thick with tension, and every shadow seemed to writhe and dance with a life of its own. Finally, I reached the staircase and hurried up the steps, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the passage like a drumbeat. As I reached the top, I glanced back one last time, half expecting to see a figure emerging from the darkness. But there was nothing, just the empty corridor and the oppressive silence that filled the space. I closed the door to the hidden staircase, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was still, but I could feel the shadows shifting around me, whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. As I returned to the library, I realized that Ellen's legacy was far more complex and dangerous than I had imagined. Her fascination with me wasn't just an oddity. It was part of a plan, a dark inheritance that had been set in motion long before I was born. And as the day faded into night, I understood that I was caught in a web of shadows and secrets, trapped by the ghosts of the past and the echoes of a future I couldn't yet comprehend. The house held its breath, waiting, watching. And somewhere in the depths of its darkness, Ellen's voice continued to whisper, calling me ever deeper into the heart of her twisted legacy. The following morning, I awoke to a world drenched in gloom. Clouds hung low in the sky, casting the house in a muted gray light that seeped into every crevice. The oppressive silence that filled the halls was heavier than before, as if the very walls were conspiring to keep Ellen's secrets hidden from prying eyes. As I made my way through the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted overnight. The shadows seemed to loom larger, and every creak and groan of the old wood underfoot sent a jolt of unease through me. It was as if the house itself had awoken, watching me with a knowing gaze. Determined to make sense of the mysteries surrounding Ellen's life and my own, I returned to the library, my mind still reeling from the discoveries of the previous day. The photograph I had found in the hidden chamber weighed heavily in my pocket, a tangible link to the past that refused to be ignored. I placed the photo on the table and studied it again, trying to decipher the enigmatic figure standing beside Ellen. The image was old and faded, but there was something unsettling about the way the figure seemed to be deliberately obscured. A shadow covered their face, leaving only the hint of a smile visible beneath the brim of a wide hat. Was this person the key to Ellen's secrets, or were they merely another piece of the puzzle I was yet to solve? The questions churned in my mind, and I felt the pull of the hidden chamber calling to me once more. It was then that I noticed something odd. A faint symbol etched into the corner of the photograph. I hadn't seen it before, but now it stood out, almost as if it had appeared overnight. The symbol was reminiscent of those in Ellen's diaries, and on the walls of the hidden chamber, an intricate design that seemed to writhe and twist as I looked at it. I reached for one of Ellen's diaries, flipping through the pages until I found a similar symbol sketched in the margins. Her notes were cryptic, filled with references to rituals and practices that sent a chill down my spine. The symbol marks the path. Only those who understand its power can see what lies beyond. The words seemed to leap off the page, an ominous warning that echoed in my mind. Part of me wanted to close the diary and turn away, to leave the house and never look back. But something, an insatiable curiosity, or perhaps Ellen's lingering influence, drove me forward. As I pondered the meaning of the symbol, a sudden crash from the hallway shattered the stillness. The sound was loud and jarring, the glass breaking or wood splintering, and it sent a surge of adrenaline through me. I jumped up, my heart racing, and rushed to the hallway to find the source of the noise. The house seemed to hold its breath, silence pressing down on me like a suffocating weight. The hallway was empty, but the shattered remnants of a vase lay scattered across the floor, pieces of porcelain glinting in the dim light. The sight was jarring, but what truly unnerved me was the fact that the vase had been on a high shelf, far beyond the reach of anything but deliberate intent. As I stood there, my mind racing with possibilities, a movement caught my eye. I glanced down the hallway and felt my blood run cold. A shadow flitted across the far wall, moving with a fluid grace that was both unnatural and terrifying. It slipped out of view as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only a faint chill in its wake. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to retreat. But curiosity, tinged with a sense of inevitability, drew me onward. I followed the shadow's path, my footsteps echoing through the silent halls. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to carry the weight of ages, and the air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. The shadow led me to a door at the end of the hallway, one I hadn't noticed before. It was slightly ajar, and a cold draft seeped through the crack, bearing with it the faintest hint of lavender, Ellen's scent. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The door seemed to beckon me with a silent promise, the shadows around it shifting and dancing like specters, eager to reveal their secret. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room beyond was small and dimly lit, curtains drawn tight against the world outside. It felt as though I had entered another realm, one that existed in the space between shadows and reality. The walls were lined with photographs, a collection of family portraits that spanned generations. Ellen's face appeared in many of them, watching me with those piercing eyes that seemed to hold secrets I was not yet privy to. In the center of the room stood an old mirror, its surface tarnished with age. The glass was cracked, creating a web of fractures that distorted the reflection it cast. But what drew my attention was the figure standing within the mirror, a shadowy form that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The reflection was not mine, but something else, something that lurked just beyond the threshold of recognition. Its eyes were hollow, dark voids that seemed to bore into my soul, and a smile twisted its lips, a grotesque parody of humanity. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, the room spinning around me as I struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. My heart thundered in my chest, and I felt the world tilt dangerously on its axis. The shadow in the mirror moved, its form shifting and writhing as though trying to break free from its confine. It reached out with an ethereal hand, fingers elongating into tendrils that clawed at the edges of reality. I could feel the cold grip of fear tightening around my throat, air growing thin and oppressive. My instincts screamed at me to flee, to escape the room and the dark presence that inhabited it. But even as I turned to run, the shadow's voice filled the room, a low, insidious whisper that echoed through my mind. "You cannot escape, Jason. Truth awaits you." The words were like a physical blow, resonating through my very being. I staggered back, the shadows closing in around me, and the world seemed to dissolve into a kaleidoscope of darkness and light. I stumbled out of the room, the door slamming shut behind me with a deafening crash that echoed through the house. My breath came in ragged gasps, and the hallway seemed to stretch out endlessly before me, a labyrinth of shadows and secret. As I fled down the corridor, the weight of Ellen's legacy pressed down on me like a crushing burden. The house seemed to shift and warp around me, the walls whispering secrets I couldn't understand, the shadows taunting me, their inscrutable dance. When I finally reached the safety of the main hall, I collapsed against the wall, my heart racing and my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. I knew now that there was no escaping Ellen's shadow. Her presence lingered in every corner of the house, a dark specter that refused to be banished. The rituals, the symbols, the hidden chamber, it was all part of a grand design, a twisted legacy that I had unwittingly become a part of. And as the day gave way to night, I understood that I was not alone. The shadows had eyes, watching, waiting for the moment when I would finally uncover the truth that lay hidden within the depths of the house. In that moment, I realized that the shadows were not just Ellen's legacy, they were mine as well. Part of me was irrevocably tied to the darkness that permeated this place, and the whispers that called out to me from the depths of the void. The house held its secrets close, but I knew that I was destined to uncover them, one way or another. And as the sun set beyond the horizon, I prepared myself for the night ahead, knowing that the shadows would continue their relentless pursuit, whispering the truths that I was not yet ready to hear. The house felt alive with anticipation that night. Every creak of the floorboards and whisper of the wind outside seemed to carry a hidden meaning. I was back in my room, the oppressive weight of Ellen's presence hanging over me like a suffocating shroud. The shadows had grown bolder, creeping in from the corners, stretching across the walls like inky fingers eager to ensnare me. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the photograph of Ellen and the mysterious figure, the symbol etched into its corner, seeming to pulse with an otherworldly energy. It was a silent reminder of the dark legacy I had inherited, a legacy that had become inescapable. Despite the late hour, I felt a strange pull toward the hidden chamber I had discovered the day before. The urge to return was overwhelming, an insistent whisper in my mind urging me to seek answers in the darkness below. Grabbing my flashlight, I made my way back to the library, my footsteps echoing in the silent house. The shadows seemed to watch me, shifting subtly as I passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into a trap. When I reached the secret door, I hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. Curiosity and a desperate need for closure held me forward. I opened the door and descended the stairs once more, the familiar chill seeping into my bones as I ventured deeper into the earth. The corridor was as dark and foreboding as I remembered, the walls closing in around me like a tomb. But this time, I was determined to uncover the truth, to confront whatever lay hidden in the shadows. As I entered the chamber, the flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light that danced across the stone walls. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and the shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own. I approached the altar, my heart pounding in my chest. Photograph clutched tightly in my hand. The artifacts I had discovered the previous day, the bones, the locket, the stones, were still there, silent witnesses to the darkness that permeated this place. Taking a deep breath, I placed the photograph on the altar, aligning the mysterious symbol with the carvings etched into the stone. As I did, a low hum filled the chamber, a resonance that vibrated through the air like the distant echo of a forgotten chant. The atmosphere grew tense, charged with an energy that seemed to draw me in. I felt the shadows closing in, wrapping around me like a shroud, and I knew I was no longer alone. Suddenly, a voice filled the chamber, a voice I recognized all too well. It was Ellen's, low and insistent, resonating with a power that sent shivers down my spine. "The path has been revealed, Jason. Embrace your destiny." The words echoed in my mind, command that reverberated through the very core of my being. I staggered back, flashlight flickering wildly, the beam casting grotesque shadows that seemed to dance with malicious glee. I watched in horror as the shadow in the mirror materialized before me, its form twisting and shifting, becoming something more tangible, more real. It was as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling, the barrier between the seen and unseen collapsing in a cascade of darkness. The figure that emerged was an amalgamation of shadow and flesh, a grotesque parody of humanity that bore the unmistakable resemblance to Ellen. Her eyes were hollow voids, and her smile was twisted, a mask of malevolent intent. "You cannot escape what you are," she whispered, the words slithering through the air like serpents. "We're bound to this place, to the legacy of our family." I could feel the truth of her words resonating within me, a truth I had tried to deny but could no longer ignore. The darkness that had plagued Ellen, that had consumed her life, was now mine to bear. As I stood there, the room seemed to spin around me, a kaleidoscope of shadows and whispers that threatened to swallow me whole. The ground shifted beneath my feet, and I stumbled forward, my hand reaching out to grasp the altar for support. Instead of cold stone, my fingers brushed against something warm and pulsating, a heart beating with a rhythm that matched my own. I recoiled, horror gripping me as the altar seemed to come alive, its surface undulating beneath my touch. The room filled with an unnatural light, casting long, writhing shadows that crept across the walls like living things. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and a low chant rose from the depths, an incantation that echoed in my mind like the tolling of a death knell. "Embrace the darkness, embrace your destiny," chant whispered, each word a weight that pressed down on me, suffocating in its intensity. I backed away, my mind reeling, the reality of my situation crashing down on me with the force of a tidal wave. I was trapped, ensnared by the legacy of my family, by the shadows that had claimed Ellen and now sought to claim me. In that moment of desperation, a glimmer of clarity pierced the fog of fear. I realized that the shadows, the rituals, the twisted legacy, none of it had power over me unless I allowed it. The darkness was not my fate. It was Ellen's, a burden she had failed to escape, but one I could choose to defy. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped forward, facing the twisted specter of Ellen with newfound resolve. The shadows writhed around her, a symphony of malice and despair, but I held my ground, refusing to be cowed. "You are not me," I declared, my voice steady despite the terror that threatened to consume me. "I refuse to be bound by the darkness you chose to embrace." For a moment, the chamber was silent, the only sound the echo of my defiance. Ellen's form wavered, the shadows around her faltering as if uncertain. But then the darkness surged, a tidal wave of malevolent energy that sought to overwhelm me. The air crackled with power, and I felt the chill of death closing in, the shadows reaching out with grasping tendrils. Yet even as the darkness threatened to swallow me whole, I stood firm, drawing strength from the light that flickered within me. The light of choice, of defiance, of hope. With a final cry of defiance, I reached out and shattered the photograph on the altar, the pieces scattering across the floor like fragments of a broken past. The symbol etched into the corner flared with a blinding light, a beacon that pierced the shadows, dispelling the darkness that clung to the chamber. The shadows shrieked, a cacophony of rage and despair that reverberated through the air. The specter of Ellen writhed, her form disintegrating, unraveling into wisps of shadow that dissipated into the ether. In that moment, the oppressive weight lifted, the chamber bathed in an ethereal glow that banished the lingering darkness. The air was still, the silence profound, a sense of peace settling over the space. I stood there, breathless and trembling, the reality of my triumph washing over me like a cleansing tide. The shadows had been vanquished, the twisted legacy undone. As I made my way back through the corridor, the flashlight steady in my hand, I felt a sense of liberation. Freedom I had not known since stepping foot in this accursed house. The oppressive aura that had haunted my every step was gone, replaced by a quiet serenity that whispered of new beginnings. I emerged into the library, the morning light streaming through the windows, casting the room in a warm, golden glow. The shadows that had once lurked in every corner were nowhere to be seen, banished by the light of day. With a sense of finality, I closed the door to the hidden chamber, sealing away the darkness that had plagued my family for generations. The photograph lay in pieces on the floor, a testament to the choice I had made. Choice to forge my own path, free from the shadows of the past. As I left the library, the house seemed to exhale, the tension that had gripped it dissipating like morning mist. The whispers were gone, the oppressive silence replaced by the gentle hum of life returning to its natural rhythm. Standing at the threshold of the house, I took one last look at the place that had held so many secrets, so much darkness. Ellen's presence lingered still, a faint echo that I knew would never fully fade. But I no longer feared her, nor the shadows that had once seemed so insurmountable. I stepped out into the sunlight, feeling its warmth on my skin, a reminder of the light that I had fought so hard to reclaim. The world stretched out before me, full of possibilities, untainted by the darkness that had sought to claim me. And as I walked away from the house, the whispers faded into the distance, leaving only the promise of a new dawn. A dawn free from the shadows of the past and the haunting legacy of Ellen's twisted fascination. The truth had been revealed, the darkness confronted, and I emerged victorious, carrying with me the knowledge that no shadow, no matter how deep, could ever dim the light of choice and freedom. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed these chilling stories as much as I enjoyed sharing them with you. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up to keep the terror coming. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring even more spine-tingling content your way. Before you go, don't forget to check out the video playing on the screen. It's packed with more unsettling tales and eerie experiences that you won't want to miss. If you have any frightening stories of your own or suggestions for future content, drop them in the comments below. Stay tuned for more haunting adventures. Until next time, sleep tight. Decant.